everybody, it is Romania Black, and we're on episode 3 of Pluto. And man, being gone for like 10 days, it's been a long time since I've watched episode 2, so I went back and kind of skimmed through it today. And yeah, Hercules being like, oh, his best buddy Brando is gone, and we still don't know exactly what Pluto is or who Pluto is. We think it might be one of the 7 the 7 robots of the apocalypse, the 7 deadly sins robots. Adam is helping out with the investigation. I still think Adam is a little bit suspicious. I don't know exactly where I stand with Adam. I think they could be partially responsible for this and they're just faking it. Or I think they could be totally innocent and they're a red herring to try to make us think that they're part of it. I don't know. And then I do want to make one note. Be Happy, who is one of my moderators, especially for this series, is French. And they were like, hey. They were like, just so you know. Mont Blanc is I've been calling him Mont Blanc. And they were like, the letters are silent. And I'm like, yes. So Mont Blanc, I hope I've said Mont Blanc. I hope I said that right, was our friendly robot that died in that first episode. And then poor North number 2. North number 2, someone described him as the Grimmer from Monster of this series. And I was like, how dare you? But also, you're so accurate. So, I love North number 2. Although Gesick has my heart. A lot of people have been sharing in the Discord really funny articles about how like robot lovers are in the future. As someone that's kind of on an asexual spectrum, I am like, yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm okay. Can I cuddle with said robot? I don't know. But yes, I am really enjoying this series. It's crazy that it's only 8 episodes and we're already on episode 3. It feels like we've covered a lot of ground, but at the same time, I'm so used to watching a 74 episode series from Urasawa that it feels like we just got started. And we've pretty much gone through most of the backstory with all of the robots. Now we know something is up with Gesick. He keeps having these flashbacks to this one scene where a guy asks him, to spend a certain amount of money and then it fades out. So Gesick, his memory may have been tampered with and he doesn't even realize it. Also, ultimate sadness. Someone in the comment, I think it was HBanana7, noted that poor Brando, in his last moments, instead of being able to access footage of Pluto specifically, instead he was trying to focus on his family. And that sucks. So we got Hercules vowing for revenge. We've got Gesick trying to figure out what's happening. We've got Adam, who we're not sure is if they're friend or foe. And we still have at least one other robot, besides the one we think is Pluto, that we haven't met yet. So I'm super curious. I'm excited to dive into this. I hope you all are too. But before we get started, I want to give a special shout out to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon. Over on Patreon, we talk about the series. Also, you can have access to the polls. Then there's also a tier to get things a week early. And the philanthropy tier members get things a week early. They get access to the polls and the discussion forums and the Discord. And they get all of that. And they also get a shout out in my videos. So I want to thank these individuals for going above and beyond to make sure that my subscriptions to services that I use for the reactions, as well as for hosting the videos, are met. So thank you to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Dana, to Be Happy, to Destiny Marie, to, and I have to say their name like this, Danger Zone, to Eric, to Kiri, to Lyndon, to Matthew Palfinier, to Shimoyama, to Sunspots, to Nameless Monster, to Trails, to Translucent Men, to Nicholas, to Mateo L. Fidel, as well as Murphew, as well as El Freya, Boo Boo, Danny Donmai, and Danovan. Thank you so much for all of your support. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. Yes, I'm super excited. I can't wait to dive in, see what we get, and then talk about it afterwards. So we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive right into episode 3 of Pluto and see what we get. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do it to it. Miyano frickin' Mamoru. I was I was like, that voice was driving me crazy for Epsilon. I was like, I know that voice. I've heard it so many times. Why can't I place it? And it was so silky, smooth, seduction, sex on a stick voice. Of course it's Miyano Mamoru. It was driving me crazy because I'm used to Miyano playing like really diva characters, and Epsilon is not. Epsilon looks like a diva character. Epsilon looks like they would fit right in with Rin from Free, with Light Yagami from Death Note. Like, looks wise, like it looks like a Miyano Mamoru character. But then they open their mouth and they're like Johan from Monster, and I was like, oh, okay. So, I feel so much better about that. I'm sorry. I'm sure it was driving you all crazy in the reaction, being like, bitch, it's Mamoru. And I was like, I can't place who it is. So, okay, Mamoru is playing Epsilon. So we have our 7 wonders. We've figured that out. The 7 robots. I don't know if I'm going to update the 7 deadly sins yet. We'll wait on that. We might go through it as we get into this again. We'll see about that. I feel like I'm going to wait till next episode, till the halfway point, to tie into our 7 deadly sins with our 7 deadly weapon robots and do it that way. But yeah, wow, this episode was a lot. It was all over the place. I feel like the first episode was like half and half, and then last episode had a pretty, like, it went to different places, but there was a through line with Brando and Hercules and Adam. Here we were going from like one place to another, right? And trying to establish what in the world is going on, right? So I wanted to look up something real quick. And what a certain word. Okay, Bora means a violent, cold north wind. Okay, and that is what's been going on in Persia, the Bora. Everybody seeing this giant robot and saying it's Bora. Okay. So, yeah, we've got a lot to talk about in this. Miyano Mamoru has graced us in Pluto. I'm so excited. He's one of my favorite voice actors, but very, very different voice acting from usual. But there's a lot of interesting things going on here, and the idea of the anti-robot sentiments gaining a little bit more layers in this episode, understanding why people would come for the robots, what's the deal with the anti-robot agenda, why we would want that. All that side of the story makes much more sense now. We've gotten introduced into Adolf's character, which, gee, Urasawa, you're a bit on the nose, but we're going to talk about it. But yeah, and this concept of the idea of robots and them being a representation of segregation and of being the other, but not being so different from humanity. Urasawa choosing to do like civil rights through robots is such an interesting choice, because as they establish, one of the themes that they're going with in this is that you can practically not tell between a robot and a human, but there is like a difference. The robots are man-made, right? Robots are man-made, unlike people. And so it's a very interesting choice to go through this idea of basic human rights with robots, because they are created by people. But then there's this idea of artificial intelligence and gaining a consciousness, and do robots have souls? And, does that make humans, like gods in a way? Like, how does that work? And so it's getting into some very, very complicated onion layered territories. So let's start out by talking about Uran. Uran is being the sister of Adam. Now, like I said back in episode 1, I know of Astro Boy, but I am not as familiar with it as other people probably are. I don't really want to know too much about Astro Boy, because I know this is, in my mind, Urasawa kind of adapting parts of it in this. So I'm afraid if I know too much about Astro Boy, it might spoil a surprise later on with Uran and Astro Boy. But I think it's interesting as a sister. Uran kind of seems like uranium, which is a element that's kind of radioactive. So I thought that was interesting. You have atomic, atom, you have your Uran, you have uranium. So that part's interesting to me. And then we have Pluto with plutonium. And then we talked about zeronium alloy. So we're getting into these like radioactive chemicals and properties and elements that are making things a little more complicated. But I think she's fascinating. I like Uran because her whole function is she can sense fear. that's what separates her from humanity and what kind of is her purpose as a robot. And I talked about it in the reaction that I feel like if we were going back to Astro Boy, what an ideal superhero ability to sense fear. That means if you sense it in mass, you can tell that there's probably something dangerous happening. So it would alert you as a superhero, oh, I need to go where all this fear I'm sensing is at. There's probably a bad guy there, and then I'll beat him up. It seems like a very 1950s superpower to have, to be able to sense fear. But I do really like that with what Urasawa does with her character, because he allows her to be able to empathize more with Pluto and empathize more with his plight, and kind of the idea that he doesn't understand what's going on. And she's able to kind of like harness that fear and kind of calm it and almost tame it, which she was doing real good. Girl was making some headway. She's like a therapist in this series. She was making progress. And then all of these factors showed up. And then Pluto realized Adam was there, and he's been charged with killing Adam. So then he overloaded because he couldn't get it to happen. The horns popped out, but he was in a different body, which makes sense now. So he couldn't go all out and fully make the tornado. He could just kind of simulate it with his abilities. And then he went back to the scary monster body. So Pluto is not one of the seven. He is his own being, this god of death that's been man-made. It feels like he's been man-made by the group of anti-robot people to destroy the robots, because that's their agenda. It's sort of the idea of fighting monsters with monsters. And speaking of which, I am going to say first and foremost, throughout this discussion of Pluto, I will be talking about some monster spoilers. I'm going to try to let you know heads up, like the next 30 seconds or next minute, I'm going to talk about monster spoilers. But I just want to let you know that there's a lot of parallels to Monster and a lot of things I was thinking of throughout this that I kept tying back to Monster. So I may mention those as we go through this. So just bear that in mind. When I start talking about a monster spoiler, I will talk about the monster spoiler, and then I'll do this to signify I'm done with the spoilers. So you'll know ahead of time if you're like scrolling through the YouTube video, this will mean I'm done with the spoiler, and we can just go from there. So yeah, I like Iran. I like her ability. I think it's cool. She like targets all these cats that were after this little boy. At first I thought the little boy was a robot, because I was like, oh, well, the cats aren't instantly killing him, so maybe he's not human, and that's why they're not instantly killing him. But that doesn't seem to be the case. I love her like just cutesy candy striper outfit. And then Adam. What I love about this is that they're both imitating children, but they are clearly like at least in their 20s. And so they're older than they seem, but they kind of have this childlike naivety and innocence to them, even though Adam's like kind of like a boy wonder. And I say boy wonder, he's like the same age as Gesick probably. So that part's all interesting to me. But what was fascinating was the segregation line of the non-human and human, because both Iran and Adam kind of look very similar. They have like the same eyes and nose almost, or the same eyebrows and eyes. And then the one guy, when he says it's getting hard to tell them apart anymore, I feel like that's such a cool reflection that in this world they're living in, there is coming to a blur between robots and humanity, and they are getting to where it's hard to differentiate one from the other. And Abdullah says that he is, he had to replace most of his organic body with that of a robot. So he's kind of like a cyborg, which again blurs the line even more, because it's like, how much of you are robot, how much of you are human? What defines your humanity? What makes you a human, and what makes a robot a robot? And Abdullah seems to be the kind of merging of those things, but he seems against the robots. So I'm so curious why, if he's part robot himself, he's against the robots, unless he's part robot because of the war, and that's why he despises robots. Like, he is what he despises, and so he just wants to get rid of them, which would make sense. So I'm very curious to see what Urasawa is going to do with this plot line. But the fact that Adam kind of sees, I'm going to take a picture of that, kind of sees Abdullah coming and doesn't exactly know what to do with him. Like, is he a robot or is he human? He's not exactly sure. And I like this idea of like blurring the lines and how that comes about. So in any case, they go to all of the, they've confirmed he has an alibi for why he couldn't be there, but we know now he has means of getting around it. So his like spy robot that he has with him looks a lot like Lunge from Monster. that's not really a spoiler, it's just a character design. Looks a lot like him with the creepy bugs that came out of his mouth. I was not ready for that. I was like, nope, gross, ew. The surveillance bugs. So it's very possible there that he has people able to do his bidding while he's away. So he can use the alibi, but still get what he wants accomplished. So there's that. But yeah, I'm so fascinated by what is his deal? Why does he want the robots destroyed? I know we're not halfway through yet, so who knows? But I'm super interested to find out. And then she talks about, I like that Iran talks to him about being like, you know, she thinks that they should be able to easily tell robots from humans because she's like, humans make really funny faces. Like, there's elements of human emotionality that she can't understand as a robot. And so she kind of like says, well, of course we're still able to be told apart. But it seems like Adam doesn't want to be distinguishable from humans. He wants to be able to be known if he's a robot or a human. He wants to be able to be considered human, is what I mean. So yeah. So she senses, when the moment that Iran sensed that there was a little element of fear nearby, and it came when the tornado came, I was like, oh, that's Pluto. She could sense like Pluto, like maybe he's afraid. And that's exactly what happens. He takes the fake body. Also, I find it fascinating that the robots in this world, the like worker robots, they have the ability to get a human skin that they can wear on their off time. That part is so interesting to me. Like, when they're working, they look like robots, but then when they're off the clock, they have a body that they can go into to go mingle with the others. That's so fascinating to me, right? That's so cool. And I think it says something for Urasawa about like the workforce and how like we wear a certain look when we're at work versus when we're not at work. That's so interesting to me. So yeah, we have this monster with these teeth and everything that looks terrifying, looks like alien, has the horns. I don't know what to do with this, but it looks terrifying. But yeah, it manages to like take its artificial intelligence and insert it into someone else, into the fake body, so that it can roam around, which we'll talk about when we get to the whole mural scene and all of that. My one thing was that Brando, so Hercules kind of chides Epsilon because he's taken in all these human kids. But I was like, Brando took in all of these kids. Were they not human? He took in like 5 kids with his wife, but they clearly weren't his biological children. So I'm like, wasn't that the same thing as like what Epsilon did? But Hercules was still wanting to like robo-bone Brando. But he's not into Epsilon. I mean, clearly Brando is a totally different type than Epsilon. So I get why Hercules would prefer Brando and not prefer Epsilon. But I was like, aren't they kind of doing the same thing? Was Hercules not aware of that? It was just Gesick aware of it? I don't know. I still think it's fascinating that we have this conversation of like parenthood with Gesick. So we find out Helena's a robot. His wife is a robot because they're both posing as people. So there's that. That's good to know. Also, their memories might have been tampered with. So I was a little bit suspicious of her at first because she was like, well, what do you mean we would plan a trip to Japan? And we went to Spain instead. And they both kind of like looked at each other. And for a moment, I suspected that maybe she was involved with him having parts of his memory tampered with. But I don't know if that's the case. It might be the case, but it might also be that the government that has issued Gesick tampered with both their memories, and she's just like, I don't know what to say about it. But I feel like Urasawa makes an interesting commentary with the fact that Gesick doesn't have any children. He's not adopted any kids with his wife. And there's lots of different scenes like him with Adam in the diner. There's the flashback where they're at war and he encounters the man that's infant died and he has to like look at the bloody crib. The idea of him looking at Brando with all his kids and being reminded about that, and Brando encouraging to have children. I just feel like there's something to be said there that they don't have a kid. They haven't adopted a child. And they did establish in the news a few episodes ago that they were just getting to the point of establishing where robots could adopt kids. Because right now, Brando's wife was human. So it made sense that they would approve her to take care of all the kids with Brando helping and providing financial support. But maybe it's not to the point where 2 robots can adopt a child. And so that's why Gesick and his wife, they're posing as humans, but they're not like fully fledged into humanity in terms of having a child, right? And I don't know if they would like create a robot baby. I don't know what the logistics of that would be like, or if it would even be worth it, you know? So that part's interesting to me. That part's interesting. But yeah, they talk about going on a trip, him taking off work, and then going to Japan. I love the idea of the Marco Polo travel assistant. That's the coolest thing in the world. I totally think that in the future we should have that, like a Marco Polo like travel guide. Like that's so clever and cute. I love it. But they're planning out a trip to Japan, and Marco Polo's like, "Oh, well, we have your wife's info on records. We've already planned this. You registered for travel 2 years ago, but canceled it." Interestingly, it was also a trip to Japan. And then they went to Spain instead for 12 months. Now, interestingly enough, if we look at the timeline here, we've established that 4 years ago was the war. We had 4 years ago was the war ending, essentially. Then 3 years ago was a lot of things. 3 years ago was when they went to Spain. And they were in Spain for a year, right? And so they were 3 years ago. There was a whole thing about, no, that's not right. Let me backtrack. 3 years ago, there was a case in which Gesick met the investigator, right? Which he met the investigator, and he kind of started doing more like random and routine incidents and cases. Then we have 2 years ago, they were in Spain for a year, and that's when they made the plans to go to Japan, and it was canceled. And then we're here now. Okay, and also 3 years ago was when Adolf's brother died. Okay, we're going to go through this a little bit later when I get to that part of the episode. My theory is that I think that 4 years ago, the war somewhat ended over there in Persia and everywhere else, and they started doing peace talks and all of this. And about 4 years ago, any fighting that these robots were doing kind of ceased, and they started doing other things, like North Number 2 becoming a butler, Brando and Hercules doing their fighting, things like that. So Gesick became an investigator. But I think 3 years ago, one of the things that happened was that Interpol's been using him, Europol has been using him to solve all these cases. I think something happened. We don't know the details yet, but some accident occurred, and he accidentally killed Adolf's brother. Adolf's brother seemed very against robots from the flashback, so my theory is that he was part of an underground organization trying to get rid of robots. He got tangled up in an incident and ended up dying at the hands of Gesick. Adolf's brother did. So for the government to cover up the fact that one of their own robots, especially one of these 7 weapons of mass destruction, killed a human, which is against their policies, and we've only seen one case of that before, and they've kind of passed it off as a, secret thing. We're not worried about them. What they did was, after the brother died, he sent the wife and him away for a year to Spain, probably altered their memories so they wouldn't remember the incident, and then when they tried to schedule a trip to Japan, they were like, "Nah, stay in Spain for a little bit and then come back to Germany." And then here we are. So I think that's what's happened. I think that's how Gesick, I think, did kill Adolf's brother, but we don't know why or how or what the circumstances were. But Adolf, now believes that Gesick's responsible. So what can we do? But yeah, it's so crazy. I really like this picture of Gesick and Helena in the sunflowers. That part's really good. I like that a lot. So yeah, I'm so fascinated by what the backstory is there and how that's what we're gonna get out of that. I'm so fascinated. But yeah, Helena has all these pictures, and he even makes note. He's like, "Wow, we have a lot of pictures," and I thought we talked about, not taking so many photos, because we were not trying to imitate humans too much. But I think that they end up taking all the photos because that way no one would suspect where they were. It's an alibi. And also they kind of forget about the fact that maybe their memories were altered. I also realized that I have been very suspicious of a lot of characters leading up to this episode. I was very suspicious of Adam. I'm not nearly as suspicious of him anymore. I'm not really suspicious of Adam anymore. I was suspicious of the Doctor. I think I was only suspicious of the Doctor because he reminded me of a character named Abraham from Banana Fish, and that character's not very trustworthy. So I was like, oh, you remind me of him, but he's not the same. However, I do find it really sad that the Doctor here seems like he's very invested in Gesick and he wants to keep him safe. And he goes, like, the balls on the Doctor to go up to the director and be like, hey, what'd you do to my robot? And the director's like, we're not going to talk about it. Gesick's like one of our top 7 robots. He was a weapon of mass destruction. You don't need to know. And I was like, that's almost worse because we know they've tampered with his memory. We don't know why. We don't know how. But it's like, it's so that Gesick can keep doing his job. And it's like, And of course, then that begs the question, if Gesick's had his memory altered, how many other robots have had their memories altered? And I felt bad for the Doctor because he seemed like he had Gesick's best interests in mind, and he's kind of worried about it. But we go to the copycat murderer, which, here's the thing. They make a really interesting case in this episode talking about the use, which this is so pertinent now. I feel like the series comes out at the perfect time because we use so much AI now in our world, and AI is emerging in so many new ways and developing in so many new ways, and we're already seeing like the ramifications of that development, and it's debate for and against. So I feel like this series comes out at like the perfect time. It's kind of creepy because, yeah, we talk about AI, which all of these robots here have some form of artificial intelligence, right? Now, whether or not they have souls, we have seen that be debated in this series. But there is this idea of AI having 2 functions, of AI taking labor from humans. And we also see this idea of AI aiding humanity. We kind of see it on 2 different fronts, right? So in the law enforcement sphere, which Gesick is in, which the little short circuit robot from episode 1 is in, and in the police force and stuff, in that sense, AI is not taking jobs, but they are assisting. So when Gesick gets on the scene here, he doesn't necessarily do any work that the detectives could have done for them. Instead, he helps them like track down fingerprints, and he helps them find clues so that they can get their job done faster and more effectively. Because he's like, there's some fingerprints there. Here's this one thing here. There's this one thing there. And the cops are like, cool, thanks. We'll take it from here. And they do. So it's not like Gesick has taken their job necessarily. He's just made things a lot more efficient and effective in finding so that they can do their job and move on to the next case. So we see that, and it seems like that would be a promising thing. Like you would want that. And then we cut back to the war where we have the forces there going in to find the terrorists, and we see the one man there. Honestly, when we did the radio, like the radiation waves for Gesick to find the man, I thought he was hanging because his head was kind of stooped down like this, and it looked like somebody was hanging themselves. I thought that's what was going to happen, but instead this man was lamenting over the loss of his child. And I think it's interesting that Gesick and Adam in the past, neither of them, they're both the most human seeming, along with Epsilon, of the 7. Mont Blanc, North Number 2, Brando, and Hercules all maintain like a robotic appearance and function during the war, whereas Adam, Gesick, and Epsilon do not. Adam and Epsilon are like the least involved, and Gesick is just involved like on the front lines on a personal level, which is interesting to me. So yeah, the man confronts Gesick and asks him like, don't you understand? And Gesick's like, no, I'm a robot. He's like, I don't understand. He's like, if you have an ounce of humanity, then you understand. How can your eyes remain so dead? And he's like, because I'm a robot. And it is not lost on me that in that moment, it's like, when he's like, how can your eyes be so dead to suffering? I was like, currently we have people at war right now across the world. And that question, nobody in that situation can use the excuse that they're a robot. they might be functioning as one, essentially, but they're all humans involved in it. It's like, oh my God. It's like, oh, Urasawa, you're getting into some deep shit with this. But yeah, it's just like the robots, are expected to do their job coldly and efficiently, and the humans are supposed to be the ones with compassion and caring. And here, the robots and the humans are, on the side that Gesic's on, functioning the exact same way. It's like, oh. And I hate it. I hate it because, yeah, the guy's like, my kid's dead now. What do I do? And it's like, what answer can you give? Right? And it's so fascinating to me because the robots talk about being in the war, and Hercules and all them talk about like killing so many of their own kind for the sake of the war itself and their rights. And it's like, it's so messed up and twisted, but it's so relatable that you just sit back and go, yep, that all makes sense. It's just, God, that line, because I'm a robot, sir. And then the one man, though, as he's crying, he turns away and cries over the bassinet that has blood all over it. And Gesic's like, what is he doing? And they're like, the man is in despair. It's more emotion than a robot like you could hope to understand. And Gesic's like, despair. So there's this concept that we have the idea that Iran is tied to fear, which is a very human emotion, but she is tied to that one. Adam is trying to imitate children, and he almost has this idea of curiosity. He has this idea of curiosity that he's gotten from children too, right? Brando has this idea of family that he's gotten that is connected to humans too. That's what Brando has. Mont Blanc has this idea of kindness and compassion that is a very human emotion that he was tied in all the people that he was helping. North number 2 has this sense of duty and loyalty that you could say is tied to a robot, but it's also tied to humanity too, where humans are loyal no matter whether it's logical or not. Duncan tried to send North number 2 away how many times? And he was like, no, I'm coming back. So that idea of loyalty is very human. Then you have Gesic. Gesic is, trying to understand this concept of despair. And maybe he will tie that concept of despair to the fact that they don't have any kids, or the fact that he's going nowhere. I don't know. Then you have Hercules, who Epsilon says has humanity's hatred. The concept of hatred. You're trying to get revenge for Brando. That's not a very robot thing to do. And it's like, ah! And then Epsilon, oddly enough, we'll talk about Epsilon in a minute, but they're tied to this concept of love. So all these different concepts are tied to humanity that these robots are all experiencing, which is really interesting. And then you have Pluto, who seems to be fueled by human hatred, but he is this harbinger of death, but also a harbinger of creation. We're going to talk about that too. But he seems to be powered by human hatred as well, kind of like Hercules. But I feel like it's maybe on a slightly different adjacent level. We'll see. So then we have the house that Adolf is in with their son. With their son that he has here. What's his name? Yeah, his name is... I'll get back here. He's like playing with his Nintendo Switch and he gets in trouble, right? And so then the mom and everything, he's like, come on, Mom, we need a human maid. We need a robot maid. Everybody else has one. Hans. Hans is his name. Why don't we get a robot maid? All the other kids in my class have one. And that's when Adolf says, no, your mama maintains the household the best she can. So, okay, getting into Monster, I'm just going to say that Adolf's design reminds me of this weird mixture between Bonaparte and Grimmer. It's a weird mixture between the two of them, is his design. That's all I'll say about that. Adolf's an interesting character because on the surface, you get why he hates robots so much, especially if he thinks that robots killed his brother. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in this, but Adolf's not an instantly detestable character, but the things that he stands for, you're like, yikes. Like the idea that this little colony in the middle of the city, they're like Amish, they're like neo-Amish, where it says, what does it say here? Deutschland, Wurz, what does it say here? Hut Morgen, Deutschland, Lichter, Actins. What is that? I want to see what that says. So I'm going to use Google Translate. I want to translate from English to, I want to translate from German to English because I'm pretty sure that that is German. Let's get in on this, shall we please? And that is, what is the, it says Hut Morgen. Hut Morgen. Which is hate. Well, it's hate. Oh, I had the letter. I had U before E. Whoop. Hey, Morgan. It says today, Morgan. Oh, okay. Oh, Morgan, not Morgan. If I would spell things correctly in German, it would help. So it says this morning. There we go. I knew Guten Tag. It says Dirch. This is going to be interesting to spell. Dirch. And then Schn. Okay, Dirch. Schn. Oh, God. Schnittlicker? Oh, my God. It's like, oh, my God. So it says more average. More average. And then Actienkers. Atkinters. Atkin. How do we spell that? Make the Atkin. Curse. Am I get that right? Exchange rate. Oh, okay. So it's like the stock market. Never mind. Okay, so it's like a stock market and all that. That's what he's looking at. Fair enough. And so he's going to town. And I like that it's all looking like 1950s Germany. And then they're like, oh, the news that one of the robots died. And then they're like, death to machines. I'm like, oh my God, they're anti-technology. Which there are sects of people that are anti-technology in the world. There was a professor that used to teach at my college that he has long since retired now, I'm sure. But when I was there, everybody talked about them. They're like, he didn't use a computer. You had to deliver everything to him like office mail. You had to write him letters. He graded with like a regular grade book. All of his stuff was on paper or lecture notes. He just was very anti-technology. But he was a really good professor and he was really good at teaching. And so they were like, he's really good at his job. So we're just going to work around him. And he's been here forever. So we'll just work around him until he retires. And that's what they did. But he was anti-tech. He didn't have a phone, didn't have a TV, nothing like that. He had a car, but that was about it. And so it was like, huh. So he was very like anti-technology. And so this is kind of like, what if that was weaponized into a cult? And yeah, of course, there's like definitely Nazi, Ku Klux Klan, white supremacist sort of connotations with this, with the hoods, with the symbol, with the whole, they have like a robot torn apart on a stake. Like there's a lot of white supremacy connotation with this group that Adolf is a part of, which is not good, but you kind of get, what I like that Urasawa does is he gives insight into why they are like this. Why are they so adamant, right? And I like the idea that this little tiny Deutschland town in the middle of the city, and there's even some below it that look like little islands, little pockets where they're away from technology, is interesting. So he goes to see his brother. Now, I was kind of like, he hasn't seen his brother in 3 years since he died, and I'm like, I don't know if that would even still be, I mean, technically, I don't know if that body would still even be like, unless they kept it frozen, like in cryogenics or something. If you just had it buried automatically, it's like it would have been long gone by now. But I feel like they had it frozen, and all that was left of the body was what was destroyed by the robot. Now, the coroner seemed like he was a robot, which how would Adolf know? But just the way he answered some questions where he was like, well, given the scope of his injuries, sir, I wouldn't recommend it. Like, he just acts very robotic in the way that he says things. So it's interesting to me. And then he wants to see it. And what does he say there? He like looks at the box and everything, and they open it up, and that's when he goes back to the doctor to have it examined. He says, because the one guy was like, oh, it was all within accordance to the law that your brother was destroyed. And it's like, oh my God. So yeah, another connection to Monster is not really spoiling anything. There's like the idea of dinner and people sharing food and conversing and bringing themselves together. But also the way that they were sitting at a table overlooking a skyline reminded me of an episode early on in the series of Monster with two characters. It's pretty good. But Adolf looks over and sees the robot having conversation at the table, and his wife notes like, oh, they can do that now. Like there's such an angle of segregated minorities being represented by the robots and how they're integrating into technology, and the people that are resistant to that definitely mirrors history. And so I like that Adolf kind of shuts her up and he's like, don't say anything. If you get heard by the government, they're going to out us. And he's like, I'm part of a secret organization that's anti-robot, so I can't be letting them find that out. And then he ends up wanting to leave early to go and see his cult, right? So I wondered why we like cut that scene of him going to the cult with the scene of Gesick firing at the armored tank with the zirconium alloy. But the whole point of that was to show us that Gesick is likely, not for sure, but likely the robot that killed Adolf's brother. Now they said that certain robots could have been issued that very alloy. Do we know for sure that it was Gesick yet? No. Does it match up with the timeline that Gesick could have killed his brother, had his memory wiped, and then kind of started over blank slate? Possibly, but we don't know that for sure yet. We need to wait till a future episode. But yeah, we have this cult that like wants to destroy robots. It's pretty terrifying. And then he talks about how his brother was possibly killed by a robot. I'm very curious because do I think that this cult group involving Adolf is the one that is responsible for Pluto and is working directly with Abula? No, I don't think they are. What I think is going to happen is this cult that wants to get rid of robots are going to be scapegoated into being held responsible if Abula gets found out. I think Abula has a contingency plan where if he gets found out, he knows about this cult and he's going to blame everything on them and throw them under the bus, and he's going to make his escape. That's kind of where I think it's going to and why we're getting into this storyline. But with Urasawa, there's no telling. Adolf and Gesick could intertwine in such an interesting way, and we don't even know yet. But this is the interesting part, is that, of course, Adolf gets mad. He says, I know my brother was a horrible person, but the idea that he was possibly killed by a robot, he deserved better than to die at the hands of a damn robot. And he gets so mad he breaks the glass and cuts his hand. So what's fascinating about Adolf is that, as the cult leader even says, he's like, your brother did some messed up stuff. And I'm like, for you all to say it was messed up is saying something. But Adolf, you know, we talk about family and the bond and closeness of family and blood. Adolf was clearly close with his father and his brother because that's all he had. His mother seems to have left them early on. So, and his brother seems to have done a lot for him, even if the means in which he did those good things were not great. So Adolf has a very close relationship with him. And it's one of those things like, even though his brother was a criminal, it's still his brother. It's still blood. So he's still connected to him and loves him regardless. And so knowing he died at the hands of a robot, which his family despised, makes it all the worse. So then we have Hercules and this one guy that was like a technician, and he was like, hey, he's like, it's not up to snuff, but I'm doing my best. And then he gets knocked down by Epsilon. Epsilon being able to knock down Hercules by just floating in like Glinda the Good Witch in his little photosynthesis bubble. Living for it. But we do get this idea before we meet Epsilon that there are people integrating within the community, within the media, that are trying to push anti-robot rhetoric, which is so relatable in our own times. The idea of people infiltrating political circles and spreading misinformation and bad rhetoric to persuade the masses. I can't imagine that happening in real life, ever. What? Who knew? But it's just this idea that it seems like Abula's group and this cult are all kind of having their ideals align to try to undo these robot laws. And the crazy thing is that in their little cult meeting, they're like, it's not necessarily destroying all the robots, but making them subservient to serve them. Like, it seems Abula wants to get rid of robots, and he's sending Pluto to do this. Or it could be the fact that they're trying to get rid of the 7 robots that are the strongest. So if we get rid of them, then we can try to, dominate and basically put all the other robots into submission to work for us, because these 7 that could overpower us are now gone. Seems to be the case. Seems to be where the story is going so far, which is interesting to me. And so basically the one guy tells Adolf, he's like, you can't just run into this and expose Gesick and kill him immediately, because if they find out about your brother, who is a criminal, they're going to use that to justify themselves, and all of our causes will be for nothing. If we have to have a scot-free record. If we find out your brother, who is a criminal, was involved, then that's going to throw everything down the toilet. So what does Adolf do? He goes full on Eva and goes and gets a damn bazooka. Because that's what she should do. Like, Adolf flies very hard off the handle, right? So while that's going on, we meet Epsilon, which Epsilon instantly is right up my alley. He has Victor Nikiforov hair. He kind of looks like Trunks from Dragon Ball Z. He's wearing the Miyano Mamoru black turtleneck for his main character. He's very slender and tall. He has a beautiful voice. He has green eyes. He's just checking off boxes. And the crazy thing is, again, we're talking about Monster. He seems like, and these are some Monster spoilers, so just skip the next minute or until I do this. But until I do this, just skip it. But spoilers for Monster. He's like Johann in the sense that he's like taking care of all the children. But he's like, what if Johann was good? That's literally what he is. The guy's like, oh, well, you didn't even fight in the war. You just like took in all the orphan children and are showing them love and affection. And I'm like, is this Urasawa's way of rectifying Johann by making him a good person in this? I'm like, what? What is happening? Because he has like the soft-spoken voice and the beautiful, like very kind of effeminate, beautiful charm to him. It's interesting. And I like that Epsilon is like, you don't need to fight Pluto. You're going to die if you do that. Don't rush into this casually. I like that he's kind of like got the black outfit and the silver hair, and Pluto is this like black being. I'm worried that Epsilon is going to get killed. I like Epsilon already. I want him to keep living. He's like, because I didn't go to war, I gained something priceless. And it's the love of all those kids. Yeah. I just like that he's like, I took them all in. He's just like Johann. He's like, we're a family now. He's like, I'm like, oh my God. And Hercules kind of chides him for taking him all these human children. And he's like, what did you take from the war? Did you take humanity's hatred? I like that we have Epsilon and Hercules back to back, and like one has love, one has hatred. It's really, really awesome. And then Epsilon's like, we have to break this cycle of hate, no matter what it might cost us. So I like the idea that Epsilon and Adam are like peacekeepers. They're striving to have peace. Hercules kind of chides them because they weren't on the battlefield, so they didn't have to experience all of this. It seems like Hercules was on one end of the spectrum, and Gesick and Brando were kind of here. And then I feel like Mont Blanc, North Number 2, and Hercules were on this side of the spectrum. Brando and Gesick were here, and then we have Adam and Epsilon over here. So that's interesting. Interesting to me. And so then, yeah, Adolf goes and gets the gun. He's going to go chase down Gesick and kill him. So then we get the idea of why Adolf hates robots so much. I like that as he's leaving the broker, he said he's going to use it against a robot. Like, that's justification. The broker's like, oh, okay, take the gun. You're good, man. No worries. And so he says, when I was a kid, advances in robotics led to vast improvements in economic productivity, and the factories shut down. So that's kind of the crazy thing. We see how AI can aid humanity, and we see that in the justice system with Gesick and Adam, right? We also see how you have figures that are like Mont Blanc and North Number 2 and Hercules and Brando in aiding humanity. And I'm assuming Epsilon is kind of in that same boat, but these are more like figureheads that did their job during the war, and then they came home and were just figureheads. Then you have the idea of AI that takes the labor from humans. And we're experiencing this right now where there's AI taking the jobs of people. And the question is, what do these people do now? And so there's like been whole segments about, oh, well, the humans will be able to program the AI, or they'll be able to do these jobs now, or something like that. But it is a question of what do we do about the labor industry? And the same thing happened during the Industrial Revolution, only now it's kind of to a different degree and to a different extent. And so the stuff that Adolf's talking about, I could very well see people now being up in arms against AI because of it, right? Because they're taking jobs, and his dad is one of the people who loses his job. And the thing of it is that he tries to like do right for his kids and get them things. And you can see him like looking for a job. He's doing like job searches on his watch there, trying to find like construction or plumbing or some kind of job on there. And then the kids are like, oh, I just wish I had a ball to play with. And the dad goes out. The dad like has Adolf's eyes, but he looks like the brother. And he goes and gets him a soccer ball. Urasawa loves himself a soccer ball. Got to get them soccer balls for them kids to play with. It's like the only sport in Urasawa's world. Baseball, out of here. Basketball, forget about it. Soccer, you better believe every kid's going to be playing football in an Urasawa series. But he gets him the soccer ball, and it like makes the kid's day. And then we find out that he stole it. And he's made like a public spectacle by the robot catching him. And then on the one hand, yeah, he shouldn't have stole the ball. He shouldn't have stole the ball. He deserved to get caught by the robot because he did something bad. He did a crime. But on the other hand, I'm sure that put a spot on his record, and it kept him from getting a job, and it just made his life harder. And then he committed suicide because he couldn't get another job to take care of his kids. So it's just this really bad scenario. And then we cut to them when they're older, and the brother is like killing robots to get a laptop. He's like, there's nothing keeping us from killing the dumbass robots all day long. And he tells Adolf that he's smart. It's kind of like the brother's like, I'm not smart. I'm just going to be a criminal, but you have the potential to move forward, Adolf, so you do that. It's so interesting seeing Adolf's like family backstory in this episode, and it makes us understand why Adolf is having the mindset that he does, whether we agree with it or not. It makes it have more sense, right? So when Gesick took the winding road and Adolf was going to shoot him, I thought that Gesick was like luring him out because he knew that this guy was following him, but that's not the case. He went down this winding road to meet Epsilon, and Epsilon again comes in like Glinda the Good Witch. It's like Miana Mamoru coming in a concert, just this little ball of twinkish light, just ethereally floating down, and then he shows up. I feel like Miana Mamoru does not agree to take a position unless the character he's playing is glamorous. It's the only way. And he's like, look, I didn't mean to ask you here on such short notice. And he's like, well, we can't talk over daddling, so what's up? And he's like, only you can stop the killer. No one else is strong enough to take him into custody. That's making Gesick sound really strong. Because Epsilon was telling Hercules, who has a robot suit, that he's not going to stand a chance. So we're setting Gesick up to be our main guy that can stop Pluto. And Hercules supposedly can't do it. I don't know if Adam can do it. Epsilon hasn't talked to Adam yet. But it's like Gesick is the only one that apparently is strong enough to do it. And Gesick's like, okay. He's like, well, whoever they are, they're dead now. Brando killed them. He's like, that's what the Europol believes, so the case is closed. And Epsilon's like, okay, sure, Jan. Do you believe that, detective? And he's like, we cannot allow Hercules to fight him. The two of them fighting would be catastrophic. Yeah, I agree. Hercules, the thing about Hercules is he wouldn't care about collateral damage, and that could be a really bad thing, especially in terms of robot relations when things are already tense. And so he's like, do you know about the new malady they're calling Persian War Syndrome? Which Abula is from Persia, so he knows about it. And they're like, it's a psychological damage exhibited by survivors. And so they talk about a guy coming out of the rubble, seeing this giant robot and saying Bora, which is the cold north wind. Which is interesting because we have North number 2. So I don't know, y'all. I'm very curious. So then we have Pluto inhabiting this man's robo skin or this robot skin. And there's all of these black drawings, right? And they just look of people running away in terror. Like they're running away in terror and agony as there's like death and destruction everywhere, right? Which makes sense that Pluto is fueled by human hatred and sorrow and despair, right? So I'm going to just say it. The guy that she finds that has been inhabited, because what does he say there? She says, what kind of energy do you take? And the first thing he says is the name of himself. It's Sol 28355, which is Pluto. He says his name first. That's the energy he takes. He takes the energy from himself. And she's like, no, what about something else? And then he says ER 1059, which I'm assuming is the body that he's inhabiting right now. So the thing is, he has this power for destruction, but then he also is capable of creation because he keeps making all the flowers and everything grow. And then he paints over the mural and paints flowers instead. So he looks like Tenma from Monster. He looks exactly like Tenma. I thought for a second going into this that he was going to be the doctor that we saw at the very beginning with Duncan. I thought for a second that he was going to be the doctor and it was going to tie back to him and we're going to find out the doctor was a robot, but I don't think that's the case anymore. It's a different person. But so this guy, Pluto, the body that Pluto inhabits that's able to like grow the flowers and everything, he's trying to find his purpose and figure out what his purpose is. And it's all the flowers atop of the darkness, like the creation of life amongst death. And I like he's dressed in all black, of course, and he has the hand over Iran there, which is interesting. He reminds me a little bit of, if you've seen the Lord of the Rings series, it's the new series that came out on Amazon Prime a few years ago. It's just based on the Silmarillion by Tolkien. Little bit of spoilers. So I'm going to put a little spoiler note up here. But he's basically based off of Sauron. If Sauron had a human form before he became Sauron. That's what this guy reminds me of. Which Sauron's like the ultimate evil in Lord of the Rings. This guy is supposedly the ultimate evil of this show. There's a lot of similarities there. So I'm wondering if Urasawa was influenced by Tolkien in that regard. I don't know. I haven't read the Silmarillion to know exactly how much the show has adapted from it and how many liberties it took. But I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, they also establish here, Adam says that they keep a registry to the Ministry of Science so they know where robots are and what they're from to make sure that they're safe. And she tries to help him keep this a secret. It very well seemed like each portion of this episode were different manga chapters. It definitely felt like that, which kind of makes sense because a lot of Urasawa's episodes in Monster were very just episodic. It was just like one episode at a time. So I could see that with this, but she goes back to find him and he's been growing all of these flowers and he's like is able to create life. He's like, it's faint, but I recall an image like this of all the flowers. You mentioned death the day that you found me. Do you think that robots die? And it's like, oh, what a question. And she's like, well, if our units get broken, I guess we shut down. So I guess that's our death. And it's like, and the thing of it is, I wonder too if the flowers he saw in his dream were real flowers or if it was like bombs exploding and they looked like flowers. Because there's often been that symbolism associated with bombings. That they look like flower fields. I don't know. But he has the ability to use like radiation to mutate foliage and create plants. But I think it's a nice commentary on how we are capable of either being fueled by our hatred and destroying everything or being fueled by love and creating new things and cultivating them. So, of course, Urasawa would make that comment on how we all have that ability inside. And now the question is, these people are controlling Pluto and fueling his hatred instead of his kindness. And Iran was fueling his kindness, even though he talks to her about being from a place that was utterly devoid of life. And a giant monstrosity rose through the smoke. And he says he's scared in that moment. Urasawa is great at drawing characters being scared out of their minds and screaming about seeing something horrifying. I was like, Urasawa trying to traumatize us all. But it's like, it's cool that we actually get inside Pluto's mind for a second, but it's also very sad because we're only in it for like half an episode and then it leaves and you're like, but why is Pluto back to the way he was? What's going on? Are we gonna get to hear Pluto's thoughts anymore? And then we have Buglunge, which is the creepiest thing in the world. His identity is Pluto. And she's like, well, you can do it, mister. You're meant to do this. And he's like, I was meant to do exactly this. He's like, that's not what it is. My painting is not a garden after all. That's not it. It's something else. He's like, the painting wasn't the garden. It's much bigger. And what does he say there? He's like, I'm not meant to just create a garden. I'm not meant to create destruction. He says, he goes outside into the sky and he says something much bigger. Nature at its most primal. So yeah, so Pluto is basically just nature itself. The tornado, the rain, the sun, the flowers, the creating life, the destruction. It's just like nature itself, which is really, really cool. I like that. That he's fueled and powered by that. And then, of course, Adam and them show up. They don't understand what's going on. Adam's worried about his sister being in danger. And, of course, Pluto freaks out because he sees all the guns. He sees everybody pointing at him. He thinks he's in danger. And then he hears Adam's name, freaks out, and is like, I'm supposed to kill you. And he overloads and then collapses. And he says, they deserve it. How many did I murder? Does anyone know? So the question is, Pluto seems to have been used as a weapon of destruction as well, but he's not one of the 7, so what do we do about that? I feel like there's a whole sect of information we don't know about yet that's not been told to us, and it's like, okay, show, when you gonna tell us this? And then he talks about seeing it, an endless world of death. Yep. And Adam's like, oh shit, this isn't good. And then, yeah, he gets struck by lightning, essentially. There's the horns, and then out he goes. And then he basically collapses at that point, like his processors burn out. So cool. So, yeah, everything gets blown out. What do they say here? Did we see? Yep, his brain was taken out. And then we see the robot looking for his body. And then, of course, they're like, there is Pluto. He's come back. It was an empty shell being puppeteered with electromagnetic waves like a marionette. Oh, okay. So the body, basically the electromagnetic waves of Pluto were controlling the fake body. That's terrifying. They can control it like a puppet from that far away. That's terrifying. What? What? Oh my God. And he's like, this is your only body, Pluto. Yep. Track down Adam and kill him. Dang it. No. Well, that's terrifying. So yeah, so Pluto's able of controlling other robot bodies from far away. Terrifying. Using electromagnetic waves. Terrifying. He's tied to Abula and this whole Bora thing that is maybe tied to Pluto. And they're basically trying to destroy the 7 robots that could get in their way or stopping whatever plans that they have. Meanwhile, there's an anti-robot group that's trying to like surface and rally forces behind it that would definitely be beneficial to Abula. Meanwhile, we're trying to figure out Gesik's memory and how it's been tampered with and why. Meanwhile, we have this whole conversation about artificial intelligence and their combination with humanity and how it's starting to blur the lines between humanity and robotics. It's a wild ride. And we get introduced to Miyana Mamoru as Epsilon, so that's fun. So yeah, I really liked this episode. It was really great. I'm very, very excited to hear your comments and to dive into episode 4. Next week we'll be halfway through the series, which this series is short, but each episode is pretty dense. So I feel like we're making a lot of headway each episode. Like this episode felt like 4 episodes in one. It was a lot. So I'm going to take time to process, maybe go back and rewatch some of the episodes. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more of Pluto. Bye!